Would David Piers please come up? You see before you, ladies and gentlemen, a member of the Piers family. To give you an idea how involved the Piers family has been in Nova Scotian tennis over the years, perhaps you should be reminded of the time a few years back when the Nova Scotia men's doubles final pitted Piers and Piers against Piers and Piers, and the umpire was Piers. David Piers is a man to be admired in many respects and perhaps questioned in others. You see before you a superstitious man, a man who once noticed in a tennis match that he was making more points with a ball that had a little smear on it from a popsicle. From then on, he tried to determine which were the lucky balls in every match he played. It worked fine until opponents noticed what he was doing, and they began putting his favorite balls in their pockets. You see before you a guy who broke more training rules than Ben Johnson. A guy who did everything wrong and yet still managed to be the most successful player in the history of Nova Scotian tennis. If you're sitting next to a young person out there, cover their ears. David Piers must have hated tennis. How could any man enjoy playing a game which made him sick to his stomach every time he had to play? He'd be so upset the night before a match that he couldn't eat. Despite having an empty stomach, he managed to throw up almost before every one of his matches. His reading of a good day was one on which he threw up early enough so that he could quaff a few Cokes, eat a bag of chips, and smoke a few cigarettes before going onto the court. He got sick before every single match, even during the decade and a half from 1951 to 1966, when he never lost one time to a maritime player. In the Quebec International one year, he took a set from Whitney Reed, the #1 player in the United States. You can just imagine this big deal Yankee looking across the net at this 5'6" blue noser, wearing the only outfit he's ever seen in, baggy shorts, an old t-shirt, and sneakers which must have changed over the years but somehow always appeared to be old and worn. The Yankee sneer turned to astonishment and then concern when he lost the first set. He did go on to win, but he went home with a new respect for Nova Scotia and for David Piers. Though he was born in Moncton in 1934, David Piers spent 38 years in Nova Scotia. He started tennis at age 7. He was coached throughout his career by his father, John. He went on to win more senior provincial open championships than any other tennis player in Nova Scotian history. Please permit me to give you a brief composite list. It includes 58 Nova Scotian titles, 7 singles, 10 men's doubles, 10 mixed doubles, 9 father and son, 10 men's doubles over 35, 1 intermediate singles, 1 singles over 35, 6 singles over 45, 4 men's doubles over 45. He had 46 New Brunswick titles, 9 singles, 17 men's doubles, 16 mixed doubles, 2 men's doubles over 35, 1 junior senior men's doubles, 1 singles over 35. He had 21 Prince Edward Island titles, 4 singles, 10 men's doubles, 7 mixed doubles. That, ladies and gentlemen, totals 125 provincial championships. The closest players to his 125 wins are his brother Bob Piers, who's won between 25 and 30, and his good friend Ken Reardon, who's won between 30 and 40. In 1952, at 18 years old, he was the #1 ranked player in Canada. In 1951, he was a member of the under-18 Nova Scotian team, which won the Canadian Championship. In 1969, he represented PEI in the Canada Games. In 1973, representing New Brunswick in the Canadian Summer Games, he and his partner, Linda O'Neill, won bronze medals. In both 1956 and 1957, he was ranked among the best 10 senior players in Canada. In Nova Scotia, he was #1 player from 1954 to 1966. When he retired from singles in 1972, he was still the reigning singles champion of Nova Scotia. When he retired from doubles in 1984, he was still the reigning doubles champion of Nova Scotia. In 1976, he won the father and son Nova Scotia Championship, 30 years to the day after winning it with his father John for the first time in 1946. They won the first one when Dave was 11 years old, and they won the last one when John was 72. David has gained much from the game of tennis, but he's also given back. through coaching and teaching. Some of his charges have done very well. He coached David Woodworth to the under-13 Canadian Championship. He coached Bob Piers to the same title. He coached Trindley Weatherston and Bob Piers to the Canadian under-13 Mixed Doubles Championship, and Bobby Piers and Barry Shakespeare to the Canadian under-18 Men's Doubles. As you can see, his mark in coaching ranks with the best in Nova Scotian sport history as well. That's one of his easier opponents up there. That's Dr. Bill White, who you saw earlier, if you don't recognize him. David Piers likes to laugh and he likes to have fun. One night when they were juniors, David left Jimmy Scriven and his girlfriend and then followed them home. Just as Scriven had worked up the nerve to kiss his girl, Piers started to make noise in the bushes. He then took off between houses with Scriven in hot pursuit, although he didn't have a clue who he was chasing. Dave felt something whiz by the top of his head but kept running. 20 years later, he told Scriven that the guy he'd been chasing, the night he almost had his head taken off by the clothesline, was him. Like I said, David Piers likes to have fun, but not when he's playing tennis. As a tennis player, he's all business. He's never given away a game in his life. Most players will reach a point in practice or even in a match where they're so far ahead they relax a bit and give up the odd point. David Piers is not among them. For 3 years, he and Patrick Power played 5 nights a week. Power says he has yet to see Piers quit on a point or give a point away because he was so far ahead. Larry Langley, ranked in the top 10, lost 45 straight games to David. We're not talking about sets, we're talking about games before he finally won one. Said Larry, he's the fiercest competitor I've ever met in any sport. I'm told Bobby Piers waited even longer. Remember, we're talking about games here. A game in tennis is only a small part of a match. Another example probably gives you David in a nutshell. He and his partner, brother Bobby, had just finished their pre-match warm-up at Wagwaldick one day. Bob had jogged a bit and then hit some serves into the fence. David finished vomiting, had his Coke, had his bag of chips, had his 3 or 4 cigarettes. Now you have to get this picture. This is the number 1 and number 2 player in the province, right? They're about to play 2 15-year-old kids who are just entering sort of to get some experience. They don't really think they're going to get a game. David spent the first 2 minutes holding up the match while attempting to convince Bob that these guys were going to kill him if they weren't really on their game. No one could ever accuse David Piers of being a cocky competitor. He's described by his opponents as crafty. If the type of game he's playing isn't working, he changes strategy. Perhaps his very attire was part of an unconscious attempt to limit his opponent's adrenaline flow. Even when his fellow players were successful at convincing tournament officials to award tennis clothing instead of trophies in an attempt to improve David's wardrobe, these new duds remained in his drawer someplace and were certainly never seen on his person. As I said at the start, you see before you a man with traits both admirable and questionable. Despite his lack of charity and unbelievable drive to win every point he ever played in his life, he's universally known as a totally honest player. Tennis in Nova Scotia is almost always played with the players themselves, determining whether their opponent's shots have been hit in or out of bounds. No one, and I spoke to many of David's partners and opponents, no one ever remembered a single instance where one of David's calls came into question. This unique combination of incredible competitiveness and total honesty is David Piers. I did discover that one of the reasons he found it so easy to be 100% honest was that he got others to do his lying for him. He spent much of his youth playing in a local Truro pool hall. He'd play half the afternoon and then he'd spend the other half of the afternoon training his little brother Bobby to properly respond to Mom when she asked where they'd been all day. To this day, and I talked to him last night, Bob thinks a playground is a smoky place with a bunch of green tables in it. His closest friends, who in many cases were his fiercest competitors, were more than a little happy to speak about all of his idiosyncratic faults. They were always very quick, however, to point out that he was the keenest, most honest competitor Nova Scotian tennis has ever seen. He was a perfectionist without question, but he never demanded perfection of anyone but himself. His longtime partner, Gordon Hughes, was one of the many who said he was totally encouraging as a partner. He'd always be there with a pat on the back when it was most needed. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you an incredibly complex man, a Canadian champion, a coach of Canadian champions, a man who overcame unbelievable obstacles, a totally honest competitor, a man who's been 125 times provincial champion, a man who the Nova Scotia tennis community is very proud to call ours, Mr. David Piers.
I'd like to call on Ken McDonald, representing Cape Breton. Ken McDonald for a presentation. David, I didn't realize you were such a battler of the nerves. Is this indeed true, or is Sandy distorting things somewhat?
It's true, but it wasn't in the early part of the career. It was in the later part of the career.
Once you got some confidence, then you began.
That's right. Then I got nervous.
And a junk food addict, nutritionist, some coaches would shake their head in disbelief.
Yes, I was. Those are all true, but I gave up smoking 3 years ago, so.
125 provincial championships. 125. So many. You can't remember all of them, or do you?
It was over a long span, about 30 years. No, you can't remember them all.
Is there a match which maybe you came from behind in, or one which you cherish?
There were so many, it's hard to describe any given one. I remember the one Bill and I had was a great one.
And yet, Sandy mentioned that you were so crafty, that you were capable of changing your game. Was that so integral to your success?
I think it was due to the fact that we used to play on clay courts, and you used to have a baseline game, and you used to have to change the speed and your strokes, and that stayed with me when we hit the hard courts.
When was David Piers at his best? You talked about you battled the nerves later in your career, but when were you at the top of your game?
I guess back in the mid-50s. 54 to 60 probably.
Ladies and gentlemen, your newest Nova Scotia Heritage Center Sports Hall of Fame member, David Piers.